Okay, we talked about the global. Now we're going to talk about the local implications. We're going to start with the discussion of Carl's teaching at the Bible College, the multiple Bible colleges where he teaches. And we're going to talk about what some of the students are facing today, what young people are exposed to, the lack of understanding of 20th century history, the people that shaped the world as it is today, how alternative worldviews, secular, whether it's secular New Age or Eastern worldviews, all these different things, are affecting society and people in the church, and what some of the implications are. So, I hope that you find this helpful, and we'll proceed with the show. Well, I was thinking, why don't we take this, we talked about the global thing, so why don't we move this in the direction of more local application? In particular, you have just recently come back from Nipawin Bible College where you were teaching a class.
Correct.
And you have students that are college age. So I wonder if you could share about or talk about what you teach there and what that's like and what you're seeing in students in places like that today.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you, George. It was a great week, a very intense week. So I teach a course, and I teach it not just at Nipawin. I've taught it at another school called Miller College of the Bible. And I've taught this course now going on, well, it's more than a decade. And the course is on secular and pagan or / spiritual trends. What does this look like? And the class I taught at Nipawin was smaller than normal. It was about 13 students, some for audit, others for credit. At Miller College, I think the smallest groups I've taught to is about 30-something, and the largest was almost in that 70 range. A lot more students. But between the two colleges, because there's a difference in size of the college, between the two colleges, what I find interesting is both of them are Christian colleges, conservative Christian colleges, and the students in both cases, the conversations that came up after class, because I would meet with students in the afternoon and then in the evenings, revolved around the same thing. I've experienced this in my life. What we're talking about in class, I've experienced this in my life. This is what I'm being taught when I went to public school. This is what my family has been involved with. I've lived this out, what you've just been describing. So I find this always fascinating, George, that personal dynamic that comes into play when you give a class like this, because my students will tell you, it's like being fed with a fire hose. It's a full week we don't have a lot of downtime. So I teach 4 hours a morning. We will have a couple little breaks in between, and it's 4 hours of intense history and then looking at how those historical movements have shaped the trends of our age. So I often begin with asking a question. I did this again at Nipawin. I've done this at Miller as well, and I've asked a question. Can you name me, can you raise your hand if you've heard these names? Back it up. I'm so sorry. Raise your hand if you have not heard these names, or if you've heard these names and they don't mean much to you. Okay? So raise your hands if you have never heard the name, or have heard the name but it doesn't mean much. Mikhail Gorbachev. Hands go up. Some of these names I didn't expect people to know, but Pol Pot. I think all the hands go up. Of course, Pol Pot, if anybody gets the ribbon prize for the largest amount of people executed in terms of percentages of a population, he gets it for what he did to his own people in Cambodia. Unbelievable, just off the charts. Mao Zedong, most hands go up. I don't expect anybody to know Khrushchev or Andropov or any of those others, but I'll mention that as well just to see, because I have older people sometimes in the class, and it's surprising all of a sudden. I remember Khrushchev. The whole famous "I'm going to take my shoe off" at the UN and bang it on the podium kind of thing, or on the desk, and we're going to take you down, America, and that kind of thing. I mention names like FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and there are some hands that will go up. Sometimes not that many, but hands will go up. I'll mention Churchill. Hands will go up. In a larger setting, okay, and I will mention Stalin. I did this time. Stalin. Joseph Stalin. Hands go up. Some hands that don't go up, but there are hands that are going up. I mentioned Vladimir Lenin. Hands go up. I mentioned Churchill. A couple of hands will go up. I mentioned Hitler. And in this case, thank goodness no hands went up. But I have had it in classes where, there's a few hands going up. And I'm like, oh boy, we're only a generation out from the characters I've just named. In some cases, not even. This is literally these are the people who have shaped the events of the 20th century, which shape the reality of your existence right now. And we don't know who they are.
Now, the demographic of these students is...
late teens, early 20s, some into their early 30s. I almost always have audited students coming who are in their 40s or 50s or even seniors who are coming to take the course.
Are they mostly rural or from cities or all across the spectrum?
All across the spectrum. Quite a few rural, but all across the spectrum. Public schooled and homeschooled. Again, usually from a conservative Christian background. Usually with a good biblical upbringing in terms of, hey, you know the biblical account, you understand theology to some degree. There are students coming who are raw or new to the faith. That's absolutely the case. But for the most part, those who are coming have that Christian background. But what has hit me is we don't have a background in terms to understand the very culture we're living in right now. Then how do we apply the biblical background, our biblical knowledge, into the context of our current worldview of King of the Hill battle that we're engaging in right now? Because if all of a sudden we are that disconnected from the recent past, how then do we take those lessons that we can learn as a culture, as a civilization, as Christians, as ambassadors? How do we take the lessons learned and move them forward if we don't even know what the lessons are, or what enabled the context for those lessons to emerge from? It's a blank slate. All of a sudden, history is not just simply, it's no longer just something that happened in the past that moved us to where we are. It's a void. It's a black hole. And that's, to me, a disturbing state of affairs. And I know this is not just within the Christian realm. I'm sure if we would do similar or have similar kinds of questions, just with the person on the street or in a public school or in a secular university, I don't know if we would see much difference in terms of answers to those questions. Nevertheless, George, that's how I open it, because I want to have a sense of where they're coming from. And every time I've asked these questions, and Nipawin wasn't so bad. There was less hands that went up, but maybe that's just because the size of the class was a little bit smaller, and we had some older people. But what has struck me is, oh boy, I need to actually scrap my class and just do a full week of modern contemporary 20th century history.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay? Like, hello, this is what's shaping your world right now. I mean, none of what we're doing and nothing that we're talking about has happened in a vacuum. If you don't understand your historical context, you're not going to grasp how we've landed on today, and you're certainly not going to get how we're being projected into the future. So, do you remember the mirror, the little writing on the side of the passenger side mirror when you're driving down the road, and you look in the mirror, it says objects in the mirror are closer than they appear? Well, that's how I look at our contemporary 20th century history. It's way closer than it appears, because those ideas have not disappeared. The personalities have disappeared. The causal effects of the ideas themselves have not disappeared. We're still living with people who have had to endure some of those consequences, and some parts of the world are still living in it. China is still wrestling with it. Hello. So it's I find it discouraging on one hand, and yet at the same time, it's invigorating because I'm like, all right, I'm teaching these students something that they don't know much, if anything, about, and we're doing it from the perspective of worldview. So one of the screenshots I bring up is the 1966 Time magazine cover, the April Time magazine cover, and it's a big black cover with red lettering, asking the question, "Is God dead?" Question mark. And that was the secular question of the age: Is God dead? And that was 1966. What was so ironic about that particular cover was that, of course, the big question wasn't secularism in the 1960s. It was the new spiritual unfolding that was happening with the counterculture, the introduction of Eastern concepts, the fact that the Eastern gurus were coming west to proselytize, and Western spiritual tourists from Stanford and Yale and Harvard were hauling off to India to go sit at the feet of the gurus. And the 60s was a time of incredible spiritual crossover. And it wasn't just simply an age of secularism. It was secularism in the sense that, and this is something I bring out with the class, secularism in the sense that authority was being deconstructed, primarily because of what happened in Southeast Asia, first with France and then Vietnam. Institutions were being degraded. Questions were arising over the purpose of the church, the importance of Christianity. Modernity was kind of, in a sense, beginning its demise as well, because modernity had left the human soul, in a sense, void of meaning and purpose. It gave us Auschwitz. It gave us the atomic bomb. It gave us the gas clouds of World War One and the trench warfare of World War One, and it moved us into the horrors of World War Two. But we weren't secular, and so what's interesting when you pop that magazine cover up, a few slides later, in the very first class, the very first morning of the very first day, I'm now popping up slides with covers from Newsweek magazine and Time showing the goddess, the God gene, spirituality, and oh my word, how we have come a long way, baby. Moving from is God dead? We've entered the secular age of the 1960s to now the year, whatever, 2020 to 2023, 2024, 2025. National Geographic comes out with magazines asking the question of the supernatural. We have a great interest in witchcraft and Wicca. You go into a bookstore and row upon row upon row. So it was just in the very first morning, it's a stark contrast between the expectation of secularism and the fact that we have instead reemerged out of that vacuum with a spiritual smorgasbord.
Which is so interesting because as we think about the way this worldview shifts are, it seems like, and I can't speak authoritatively on this, but it seems like Christian apologetics teaching is still geared toward teaching people how to defend your faith against atheism.
Right.
Logical arguments, reasonable arguments of why God exists. When, and the people that hold to an atheistic point of view are, grew up with a church background, and so that you have this kind of weird combination of logical arguments for why God might exist. You convince people, and finally the idea in apologetics, you convince people that God might exist so that they'll finally return to a Christian belief. Now you have this hodgepodge, this what we would say in Filipino, this hollow of different worldviews and beliefs, and we're not addressing what's driving that. We're addressing ideas of atheism.
Right. And I understand why there's still, within the apologetics world, such an interest around the question of atheism. I get it. We've just gone through a period And it was a short period. I mean, if we're honest about it, a really short period where we saw the new atheist movement really kind of gain speed, gather attention, really hit the academic world. It hit the social media world in a big way. But you have the likes of Richard Dawkins and you know Dennett, and you've got the Sam Harrises of the world. I mean, they made a noise, they made a splash, and yet at the same time, we haven't become more atheist. In fact, we now, I mean, my goodness, even with just immigration, how that has shifted what is happening. Talking about, again, a global to a macro, pardon me, a global macro approach to the micro local approach. From the global approach right now down to your own homestead, your own community, your own neighborhood, where all of a sudden your doctor might be Muslim. And the people owning the grocery store or the gas station on the corner might be Sikh, or you know, the people you're going to be running into at Walmart are now Hindu. We didn't run down the road of hard atheism.
And half of the tech sector at the company you work for are from either India or some other country.
Right. Right, so it behooves us to be able to see, okay, from an apologetics point of view, there has been a radical shift. Yep, okay, the West, we had a brief enamoration with atheism. Is God dead? You know, that big question. But that's lost. I think in many respects it's lost its on-the-ground flavoring as we instead realize we have spiritual alternatives all around us. And doesn't mean that, let's say, if you were born in Canada or the United States, that you automatically are slipping into another worldview, another spiritual worldview. You may still have more of a secularist mindset. But there's now because of immigration and because of pluralism, there's an openness. You rarely do you ever hear somebody say, well, you know, Islam's wrong, Hinduism's wrong, how intolerant. Islam to some extent, but the rest are not labeled that way. But you hear that with Christians a lot. So you could be I've heard this from atheists downgrade Christianity and then uphold some of these other religions. But I'm like, I thought you were an atheist. I'm an atheist when it comes to the Christian God, because that's the Western concept that I grew up in. But now I can't say I'm an atheist to these other religions because, well, because.
They don't want to say it to Muslims because they don't want to get targeted by, remember the Charlie Hebdo
right
things. Muslims might get really mad. There's different worldview implications and different responses. It does draw out some of the violent responses. I think with the idea of not being critical of the Hindu or those others, I think it's probably a combination. On the one hand, it would be disrespectful, and they're perfectly fine with being disrespectful to the religion of Western culture, but they don't want to be disrespectful to the religion of some other culture. But it's also comes down to that natural tendency that human beings have, because we've been corrupted by sin, and sin doesn't want to acknowledge our Creator, and so
right.
and all those other systems don't acknowledge the sovereignty of, and maybe Islam does acknowledge a one God, but it's a very, very different way of looking at him. And,
yes.
And the other religions, certainly they look at God and creation as being one and the same. So it also one of the things that I wanted to ask about these students that you're teaching. I mean, surely some of them are doing what all normal teenagers do and questioning their own worldview.
Absolutely.
And have you had many conversations with students that are like, I'm not sure if I really believe in Christianity, or say, actually these things that you're saying that the rest of the world believes, I think that makes more sense. I think God and creation are one. I mean, you're at a Christian Bible college, so it's probably not likely you'd get very many that might respond that way. But have you gotten anything like that?
Not directly like that. It's more like, oh, I have never thought about what you just said.
Okay.
I've assumed, I've already, and this is the interesting part, I have already absorbed these worldviews and never challenged the assumptions behind them.
Okay. What would
I've
be
had
an
a
example?
lot of that. Okay, sure. So I'll give you an example, just right down to the most basic example, and this is something that I I hit on over and over and over again throughout the course of the week. I tell my students up front, you're going to get tired of me saying this, but this is the essence of it, and this is actually the essence of our apologetics as we consider this re-enchanted world. And that is that there's only two ways of looking at reality. Ultimately, yeah, there's lots of ways we can fracture that out, but either it's creation and a creator, distinct, or God, man, and nature all share the same essence. Which is it? And that shakes some people because they're like, oh, I've never looked at it that way. Because once you look at that from the perspective of God is distinct, holy, exalted, he is other, he is literally other than the rest of creation, then all of a sudden it brings into question, well, where do values come from? Well, values come from a God who creates distinctions within creation that already from that perspective bring value into play. If it's all one, there are no real true intrinsic values. There's nothing that ultimately creates distinctions.
Right.
Your cat and your cancer, it's the same thing ultimately. Why work? And this is probably one of the most interesting perplexities and ironies of the globalist one-ist mindset. I heard this at the Parliament of World Religions. I know, George, you've heard it at Burning Man. You've heard it in a few other places. We're going to work to make a better world. I hear that all the time. If I'm at a UN event, if I'm at a NATO event, we're working to make a better world. Well, if your one-ist worldview, if you really are holding to that, there is no better. There is no tomorrow. Why are you striving? All we have is the eternal now. Why are you striving so hard to escape this position you're in today for what you think or believe is a better position tomorrow? That's a value position.
Mm-hmm.
Flat out. There's no other way to describe that. That's a value proposition. Today, we have problems. Tomorrow, we want peace and we want the problems resolved. We're going to have to somehow figure out how to get from point A to point B. Hold on. That's actually adopting that perspective of values that come from a higher position, a transcendent position. We can overcome the problems of today and look for a better hope for tomorrow. That's a Christian position. Mm-hmm. If we were true to the one-ist position, we would go, well, there really is ultimately no better. There is no tomorrow. There is no hope. Right. Let's just wallow in our sorrow and despair, because what else do we have left? But we don't live like that ever. Not even those who hold to that one-ist perspective lives like that. We all want a better tomorrow. We all want hope in tomorrow. We're trying to work towards a better future, however that might look, at a small level or a large level. So, I mean, those are some of the questions that all of a sudden pop up, some of the way of thinking that we wrestle with back and forth. There's always students that come alongside who've been like, man, I was so washed in that worldview or washed in that particular perspective. Never thought about it. I never even really thought about why I've rejected that. Maybe I haven't rejected that. I've just added Christianity into that.
So there are a number of people that recognize once you teach that, I've been thinking of God and creation as one and the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That is all oneness. I feel this oneness. And so that's one of the things that's kind of interesting, how many times I've had students who admit to forms of syncretism now that they've had to wrestle through with what I've taught in the class, because they're seeing it in the class. And then when you contrast it to biblical Christianity, you realize that from a worldview perspective, they're not compatible. but they've held these, they've adopted them. They haven't even, more often than not, George, they haven't even thought about them. It's just an automatic cultural reaction, a cultural acceptance. Let's call it a cultural appropriation. We just adopt, and then we mix it in with our Christianity, and we don't see how we have synchronized these conflicting worldviews and theological positions, but we're holding them both now. So that's been a really interesting takeaways I've seen every time I have taught this class, students who have, in some respect, come to that realization that they have held worldviews that are not just simply not Christian, but even opposed to the biblical perspective, without even knowing where those worldviews came from. Because it's just part of the stream of our culture, part of the stream of our time. That's just where we're at. And so, okay, so that just opens up. All we've done now, George, is open up the first class of the first day of the first morning. We've got 5 days, 4 hours of classes per day to go through. So we'll be covering after that issues like how this impacts. In fact, the next class I do is how we see oneness in play in the Bible with the Tower of Babel and the fall of man, and how that goes from individual to collective, and then using examples. And I've got it's a fun series of slides I love showing my students. Many modern day examples of structures built specifically with a Babel concept in mind. And I'll often ask my students, name me the first city in the Bible, and inevitably hands go up. Babel. And I'm like, no, sorry. The first one's Genesis chapter 4, Enoch, built by Cain, as he now battles the curse in his own power, and instead of wandering like he is supposed to, constructs for himself a settlement. And then what does that mean in terms of the meaning of the city? And I'm indebted to Jacques Ellul, who's wrestled through some of that. I'll bring some of his concepts into the game, even though there's times I'm like, I don't even know what you mean, Mr. Ellul, but because his stuff kind of just can go over my head. But we have a great time wrestling all of these things through together. So by the time the first morning is done, we've gone through the basics: secularism versus spirituality, the shift in worldviews. We've tackled oneism versus twoism. We've taken a look at the biblical approach to what that looks like in terms of Isaiah 40, demonstrating God is outside of creation. He holds everything in his hands. There is none that can compare to him. We'll take a look at Genesis chapter 3, the fall. We take a look at Genesis chapter 11 with the Tower of Babel, and we bring modern equivalents into play all the way through, always comparing and contrasting, because we're always in the shadows of Genesis 3 and Genesis 11. And so that is a theme woven through literally every single day as we encounter case studies from transhumanism to paganism, from global governance and collective security issues to interfaithism. And then at the very end of it, we end up, I take them virtually, of course, I'm not physically taking them, virtually taking them to transformational culture, where we land where it's felt, where it's experienced in its raw form, being, of course, Burning Man as the mothership, but many other gatherings that are associated like Burning Man. And I talk about you, George. Usually when we land on there, I've got some slides from the Texas Eclipse Festival, and I'll talk about how you and I met, and just the overwhelming nature of what that weekend was like. Because it was a really dynamic, powerful, huge event, and it unrolls, it reveals how deep and how broad that cultural sub-movement is. So those are some of the things we do. That's what we did 2 weeks ago, a full 20 hours.
And when are you going to do Miller?
I'm going to Miller College at the end of February.
Okay.
So, yeah, the last week, I believe it's the last week of February, we're going to be tackling that as a class. We'll see how it goes. It's always interesting. There's always interesting conversations afterwards. And I know I brought that up already, but my goodness, that to me, in a sense, the class is exciting.
Right.
It's far more exciting sitting down one-on-one or in a small group and having just cool conversations with these students. Oh, and psychedelics. Okay, so I do bring psychedelics into the conversation.
Okay.
I believe I do that end of day 2. I bring some of that in because I'm giving a timeline. I'm actually giving a timeline from modernity through modernity into postmodernism, into re-enchantment. You have a timeline. By the time you get to Wednesday, we're through the timeline. You've had a lot of history thrown at you. And then we go into case study after case study, interfaithism, environmentalism, transhumanism, that type of thing. Evolutionary culture. But what's so cool is the conversations that will unfold as they're seeing this in their own life. And all of a sudden, boy, probably like 2 years before COVID, like 2018, maybe 3, maybe 2017, I have students coming to me because I'm just dropping it. I'm not even going into detail. I'm just dropping the word psychedelic. And I'm talking about how there's a renaissance in psychedelics, as there will be now a renaissance in the worldview that accompanies it. It did in the 1960s. Psychedelics shifted America's worldview dramatically. We're in the throes of that again. And I just brought it up more or less in passing. Oh, George, all of a sudden I have students coming, Mr. Tyker, can we talk? When I was in school, we were being pressured to do mushrooms. Our youth group, we're talking about this in a positive way in our youth group. My family has been pushing me to do psychedelics. And all of a sudden now the conversation is a recognition that within the Christian community, psychedelics is making an inroad. It's from 2017, 18, 19, it was like the hints of it were there. Now it's like they're all nodding their head going, yeah, oh yeah, no, it's there. It's Joe Rogan. It's the culture, the conservative culture, or what we consider maybe not necessarily conservative culture, but the Joe Rogan. I'm trying to find my way. I'm trying to find a path through this maze of worldview complexity and trying to find a way forward. And along the way, we explore all of these different topics, including psychedelics. And of course, they're not coming from it from a critical angle. It's from an experimental worldview and adoption angle. And that has been telling, George, really telling in the last 10 years, that shift, that move from I'm being pressured to people going, yep, this is part of our challenge now in this generation. Regardless if we as older Christians see it or not, they're living it already. So it's a fascinating. I personally, I'm biased because I'm teaching the crazy course, but it's fascinating. I love it. I love spending time with the students. I don't like correcting papers. I hate that, but I love spending time with the students. And quickly before I forget, I'm sorry, George. One of the assignments I have my students do is in the beginning on day 1. I give them all a sheet of paper with 10 different YouTube videos to watch. They have to pick one, just one. All of the videos come from a worldview that is antagonistic towards Christianity. Some of them are so over the top, so in your face, so blatant in their language and what the videos are about. And so my challenge to the students is, that evening, yes, you're supposed to do it day 1. Pick a video. Don't watch all 10. Just pick one. You don't have to pre-watch anything. Just choose. Simply choose one. Now, sit down at your keyboard and write a reaction the way you would upon seeing a friend posting something as ridiculous or as something as weird or berserk as what you've just seen in your video feed. Don't think about it. Don't give me a response. Give me a reaction. Gut level, and they're like, this is the craziest video I've ever seen. I can't believe people think like that. How stupid, stupid, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. I don't even care if your spelling is correct. I want you to just pour it out. React, because that's how we in the Christian world so often deal with the challenges that confront us.
Yeah, that's good.
By the end of the week, after we've wrestled through the underlying worldviews, because all of these videos have an underlying worldview, and we've all gone through them together, especially the one-ist worldview. At the end of the week, now that we've wrestled through them, we see that there's real people involved. There's real lives at stake. There's real consequences to these ideas at the local level and all the way up to the global level. It's real. You can't escape it. Even if we say, oh, I'm just going to wear my blinders in my Christian world. Too bad. So sad. That's not how the world works. So at the end of the week, they've seen all of this. We've played it out. Now go back. Rewatch that video. Rewatch it now with a different heart. Rewatch it with a different mind. Now respond, not react. Bring a biblical, well-reasoned, articulated answer to the underlying challenge that you see in that video. Give it to me not in 2 paragraphs the way you would with a reaction. Give it to me in 2 pages and demonstrate that you are now wrestling with that worldview from a biblical perspective. Use facts, use logic, use reasoning, use scripture, and give me now a completely different paper than what you did in the beginning of the week. Fun exercise.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Really good. Wow.
So that's what we did, George. That's what we did 2 weeks ago. That's what we'll be doing in about 2.5 weeks from now. Again, maybe 3 weeks from now.
Well, I think that's fascinating, and I'm really glad that we get to do it, or that you get to do it, rather. I would love to teach a class myself like that. I don't know when I would have time. I'm on the road so much, but yeah. Well, okay, that's really good. It just gives us, I think, it gives us a lot to think about, especially when that even these Christian kids, and that's our first responsibility, is that they are, without realizing it, absorbing and syncretizing the modern worldview, the modern secular New Age re-enchantment. They're really syncretizing the modern re-enchantment idea, which basically puts God and creation in the same thing, and they don't realize that they're doing it. And I think, that's always been a problem in Christianity, is syncretization. I just heard recently, there was a guy that spoke at our men's retreat this weekend, and he was telling a story about how a man who was in ministry with his father for 30 years, he was a local man, was a very well-respected person in ministry, I think doing evangelism, and they were working with a church. And after his father died, 2 or 3 years after that, his father's ministry partner renounced his faith, said that he was atheist, and when he talked to him and asked him, he said, well, I just don't believe in God anymore. I don't believe that he's real. And if he was real, why would he have let your father die? And that kind of thing. And that was the way that they were responding in the age, in the past 80 years, 80, 90 years, or maybe 150 years, where secular ideas and atheism were the primary challenge of Christianity. Is it's syncretized, and people don't realize they get a syncretized worldview. They believe God used evolution to create man, and what that means ultimately is really the reason we're here is all because of natural processes. God created those natural processes, but that's the reason why we're all here. That's what that worldview says, and that's where it went for all those years. And so people that really adopted to that idea would be thinking in the back of their mind, well, maybe God really isn't real. And I mean, for me, in my own life, the times that was the source of doubts about the reality of God for years that I had, even after I was born again. And when I realized, but I knew that God was real, but I'd have doubts. When I realized that the reason I had doubts was because I'm thinking that there's still validity to the theory of evolution, that it's all scientific, it's all, and I was like, whoa, that to me was the proof that that theory is wrong. And I say proof. I shouldn't say proof because we're not actually proving anything.
Right.
That to me was the indicator that that theory is wrong, because I know deep down I have absolute certainty in the reality of who God is and what He did by becoming a man and coming to the earth and walking on this earth. So I don't have any doubts, and I don't need to prove it by any means. But I'm thinking that the challenge is different for the younger generation. The generation today, the challenge they're going to be growing up in is, it's not whether or not God is real, it's whether or not God and creation are one and the same. It's whether or not the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars are God and I'm God, or God is separate and I'm His child. It's whether or not when I die, I go through a process of reincarnation, I keep coming back, and then go through life and keep coming back, and at some point, if I become enlightened, I reach nirvana. Then when I die, in that state, I ultimately go and become one with the source of the universe. So I ultimately lose my individual identity, never exists again. It's absorbed into the greater source, which that's kind of the Hindu mindset. And whereas what we understand from the Christian point of view is God is a loving Heavenly Father and has a plan and a purpose for each one of us. And when I die, I will not lose my identity as an individual because I'm His child. He wants me to be His child. He wants me to reflect His image. And I will reflect His image now when I'm alive on this earth, and I will reflect His image after I die, when we're waiting for the resurrection, and then when we're given new bodies resurrected in the likeness of Christ, I will reflect His image then. I will never, ever lose my individuality, my individual existence, because God created me to be an individual, and He created each one of us for that purpose. And I think that's one of the lies of Satan. He wants to get people to not fear death by telling them, well, that's our ultimate purpose, is to go and become one with the source. In reality, is they're going to be spending an eternity apart from their loving Heavenly Father and wishing, why did I listen to that idea?
Right. Ideas have consequences on the macro scale, the global scale. We're watching this play out because even politics, economics fits into a worldview. But it has consequences right down to the personal level, right down to the level of our own soul.
That's right.
To me, it again parallels the Genesis chapter 3 issue with the Genesis chapter 11 issue. Genesis chapter 3, here's the lie. You can be as God. Transgress God's laws, transform into a divine being yourself, or into divine likeness. And we do that at the personal level, whether it's a secularist approach or a New Age approach, or whichever approach it is. It still takes that perspective of, I'm the one who's in charge of my own life. I'm not going to bend my knee to my Creator, period. We do that individually. And then Genesis chapter 11 demonstrates this collectively. We will now collectively put our structures in place. We'll collectively build our order, because that's what's happening. It is the building of an alternative order, a new world order. We will collectively design the system to keep God out and to say that we're going to be the ones building our own paradise. We build our own way to God, and we do it as a group. We do it collectively. And so we see, even biblically, that parallel, the shadow of both are constantly at play in our lives personally, my life included, and played out in the bigger sphere of how we interact with each other, from the local literally to the global. And in a sense, that's what our little talk today did, didn't it?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, I think we'll probably need to end it there, and And we'll, I know we have a whole lot of other things to talk about, as we will be coming up with more podcasts and interviews soon of people that we want to interview. And so, thanks for your time.
Oh, this is awesome, George. Thank you for hosting it. And for those of you who want to know more information and check out what we do, go to Orbis Sentry, orbissentry.org. You can donate. You can engage in some of the literature that we have there. Yeah, we want to be a resource for the Christian community to start thinking critically about what it means to be an ambassador for Christ in an age of cultural diplomacy.
That's right. Exactly what we're going to do. Thank you. Yes. We hope to hear from any of you who have not already signed up on our website. Until then, we'll see you next time on our next podcast. Thank you.